Hi everyone, my name is Sumit and I'm a first year medical student. Actually, I just finished my first year, which means I think we have, I don't know, 8 more years left or something. It never really ends. But all kidding aside, for those of you studying for your MCAT, I wish you guys the best. This really is a great journey, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about a subject that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's the nervous system. And where I'd like to start is just begin by looking at the basic organization and terminology with the nervous system, and then go into the structure of the neuron, both of which are very important. I actually feel like the first part is pretty neglected, which is why I like starting with it. And to discuss it, I'm going to create a little chart with you guys. Now, I'm sure you've heard the nervous system referred to in a couple different ways, and it's organized by referring to it as the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. And the central basically just includes the brain and spinal cord. And the peripheral talks about all the other nerves. Now, this way of talking about the nervous system, of classifying it, is often known as the anatomic method of classification because you're utilizing the anatomy of where it is to describe which part of the nervous system you're talking about. Pretty simple. Now, the peripheral nervous system can be broken down into further components: motor and sensory. And this is the functional way of classifying the nervous system, just because this refers to the functions of various portions of the peripheral nervous system. So another term that you're going to hear a lot, and it's probably one of my least favorite ways of talking about it, is afferent and efferent neurons. Now, these words sound very similar, but they describe very different things. And motor neurons are referred to as efferent neurons, and sensory are called afferent, with an A. Now, they're only one letter apart, but they describe different things. Efferent neurons, with an E, describe neurons that are going from the central nervous system out to the body, and they are exerting an effect, like spelled like this, effect on different parts of the body. For example, they are usually in contact with like the muscles or organs. They're part of, obviously, the motor portion of the nervous system, so they are causing it to do things. And sensory is carrying information back towards, from the periphery back towards the center. So this is called afferent, and this is efferent, and it's something that you just have to get used to, and once you remember it, you're just going to have to commit it to memory, and it'll be a little bit easier when you hear it in different contexts as well. Now, the motor portion can be split further into autonomics and somatic. And when we talk about autonomics, we're talking about functions such as heart rate and sweating, things that you don't have conscious control over, that your body controls for you. And somatic basically means voluntary. So when you decide to raise your hand in class or punch someone in the face, that is somatic. Now, autonomics are split further into something that you've probably heard of: sympathetics and parasympathetics. Now, talking about these two terms would take an entirely separate video on its own, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And I basically just wanted to go through this before I dove into the structure of the neuron, just because I feel like it's often neglected, and it's a very important thing to understand to see how everything's related, because sometimes people will refer to the autonomic nervous system, and then they'll talk about the central nervous system, and you'll want to know how everything is organized and how everything is separated. So I hope this helps out with that a little bit. Alright, so that's that. Let's move on to talking about our friend, the neuron. Now, a neuron is a cell in the nervous system, and like any cell, it has a nucleus, and this circular structure is called the soma, this entire portion. Now, these branches that are coming off of it are called dendrites. And what they are for is they actually are the portions of the neuron that are connecting with other neurons, and they're receiving inputs, whether it's stimulatory or inhibitory. We'll get back to that in just a second. Now, this portion right here is the axon. And it's very important because this is where the electrical impulse, or the action potential, is generated and propagated. And this is usually the longest part of the neuron. Now, this portion right here is the axon terminal, the ending point of the neuron, and this is where it connects to other neurons, or whether it connects to other organs or muscles. And this ending portion right here, the place where it makes that connection, the connection is called a synapse. Now, this area right here, the beginning part of the axon, is called the axon hillock. And it's a very important portion because that's where the action potential originates, and it propagates starting from this point going down. Now, a part of the neuron that we can't neglect is something called myelin, and I'll explain that in just a second. Now, myelin is a substance made out of lipids and proteins that wraps around the axon in distinct places and actually leaves a space in between. We'll get back to that space in just a second. Myelin, like I said, is made of lipids and proteins, and it serves to act as an insulator. And it is produced by oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system and Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. So these are separate cells that will produce myelin that wraps around the axon and helps act as an insulator for the electrical current. So that means that whenever there is an electrical current generated here, okay, it propagates very quickly down the axon. And the way it propagates is very unique. It doesn't just slowly travel its way down. It actually jumps and is reproduced at each of these portions. This jumping motion is known as saltatory conduction. And saltatory, or I should say saltar, if you speak Spanish, means to jump, so if that helps you remember it. So there's that unique jumping action that helps the electrical impulse travel down huge distances in a very short time. Now, this area in which the impulse is regenerated each time, and that is not covered by myelin, this is called the nodes of Ranvier. And you have to say it just like that. He was a French guy, Ranvier. These, like I mentioned, are spaces not covered by myelin where the action potential is regenerated each time. Now, to talk a little bit more about the axon hillock and the action potential, we'll delve into a lot more depth in future videos, but I wanted to make sure a couple of things were pretty clear. Now, we know that the axon terminals connect to the dendrites, or they can connect to dendrites of other neurons. So similarly, if we look at this dendrite, we can expect that there would be axon foot processes connecting to this as well. Now, there can be stimulatory and inhibitory foot processes giving their influences into the cell. Now, basically, in this portion, in the axon hillock, the neuron decides whether it's received more stimulation or more inhibition. And if it's received more stimulation, it'll decide to fire its action potential. And this is one way of modulating whether a neuron fires or not. And if any of that confused you, I will definitely go into it in more detail in future videos about action potentials and synapses. Now, one last thing I wanted to clarify is the difference between a nerve and a neuron. And a lot of times these terms are used very interchangeably, and I know I'm guilty of it, and people you'll probably interact with are guilty of it as well. Basically, the difference is a neuron refers to a single cell, whereas a nerve refers to several neurons, or not several, but many, many neurons together going to innervating a similar area. So that's the essential difference between those two. And I hope this video has been helpful and you have understood the main components. Try to remember these aspects of the anatomy because they're very important, and understanding the importance of myelin and how it contributes to saltatory conduction and the rapid propagation of the impulse is very important to understanding the physiology of the neuron. Thanks very much.